Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. I hope you guys are doing all right. This is the Sunday edition of the show. I didn't get to do my videos in on Friday, so I thought I'd get some videos in today. And I can kill two birds with one stone, testing my new setup, make sure the sound and everything else is correct, while simultaneously hitting a few stories that I wanted to hit. I wanted to show solidarity with another journalist, Richard Medhurst. I've never met Richard Medhurst, but I've seen him on social media. And with any journalist that I find myself in a similar sandbox to, not necessarily, maybe not exact, but definitely in a similar sandbox. I mean, after all, if I'm seeing him on social media, he's in my circle on some level. Richard has been having difficulties doing what he does, which is effectively journalism abroad. He was arrested in the UK. He was also arrested in Vienna. And not to bring in my own situation, me being fired from my own job, I never called myself a journalist. I think I was an analyst. But still, there's something to be said about this thing of countries saying we believe in free speech while simultaneously going after journalists that are going with the notion of free speech. And again, it's not necessarily saying anything off the rails. He is just giving a certain point of view that they don't necessarily like, in a similar way that I was given a point of view that they didn't necessarily like. Now, they could necessarily put me in a cage because we do have a First Amendment in this country, but Richard is not in this country. He is in Europe, and Europe is a different animal. There is no First Amendment in the UK. There is no First Amendment in Vienna. That is American invention. And so he is not necessarily afforded the protections that you would get if you were doing this in America. And again, those protections, an end run could be made around those protections in a way that they did an end run in order to take me off my radio station. There's something dramatically problematic with this idea that a country can put somebody in a cage, make up trumped up charges in order to go after that particular person, and then either economically destroy their livelihood or put them in a particular situation that destroys their capability of doing what they do for a living. It is outrageous, to put it mildly. This idea that you have, look, the media thing is not minor, it's not trivial. Oftentimes there's a reason why in issues of warfare, you prevent the other person from giving their point of view of events. You don't want that point of view aired. You want to give your own particular narrative. You want the narrative to be enforced and, let's say, validated by the media circuit that you have at your disposal. There's a reason that U.S. aid put, billions of dollars into Ukrainian media before the overthrow took place, or millions of dollars into Hungary, or millions of dollars into Romania. There's a reason for that. They do it because they want to influence point of view. The point of view dramatically matters in regards to the way a country operates. Think back to the Vietnam War, for example, where they made the point of saying the moment that the media turned on the U.S. government, they could not sustain the Vietnam War because the public wasn't necessarily behind it. Meaning that when you are going for something as a government, the point of view of your audience and the point of view of your population is dramatically important, which is the reason why they are screwing with Richard right now. Richard found himself in Vienna, Austria. And in Vienna, Austria, just like in the UK, he was arrested. He was locked up for a bit. They raided his studio. And they told him that they believed that he was a member of Hamas. I shit you not. That is astonishing. The idea that you advocate for Palestinian liberation and they need to create a charge by which to go after you for. And the charge that they come up with is the British guy who's doing media and journalism, because he has a certain point of view, that he is Hamas, that he is a member of Hamas. That is outrageous. That is outrageous. I would have almost preferred you just locked him up because you wanted to lock him up, as opposed to just making something up like that in order to go after the guy and torment the guy for doing his journalistic due diligence. It is outrageous. I'm going to play you what he said happened, because this is an astonishing new norm that we are effectively confronting in regards to media and the persecution of people who are putting out media that these governments, who are getting very insecure, don't like. when we had just regular television channels or regular newspapers, okay, well, you can enforce a narrative because there's nothing alternative or there's nothing given a perspective that deviates from the narrative that's going through the newspaper or, for that matter, the media organizations. Whether you watch it MSNBC, whether you watch Fox News, whether you watch CNN, there's a very specific narrative that they are putting forward that goes within certain boundaries that they run with. But that may not be true. It may just be the thing that they are putting forward as their point of view. When social media came into fruition, you finally got this situation where people can peer into these things themselves, and they can come away with different assessments than the narrative that was being put forth by a particular government that was amplified by a particular media. You have social media. Okay, well, now the governments have a problem. We have a narrative. We want our public to take that particular narrative, and we want them to run with that particular narrative, and we don't want anything to deviate from the point of view that we're trying to put forward. How do you deal with that? Well, apparently, the UK, or for that matter, Vienna, has decided to deal with that by putting him in jail, by putting him in a cage, by raiding his studio, and by saying that he's a member of Hamas. This is Richard explaining it himself. I am astonished by this. This is terrifying, to put it mildly. I'm not going to play the entirety of this, but I do want you to get a good assessment of what they are doing abroad. What I'm hoping doesn't necessarily come here to the United States, but what they are definitely doing is terrifying. This is Richard telling himself his own story.
From the UK. On Monday, agents from the Austrian police and intelligence services detained me, raided my home, raided my studio, and then interrogated me. They essentially lured me into a trap. So I received a letter from the government last week, from immigration, summoning me for some interview at my residency. I found that a bit odd because I've lived here for a while. I never had any problems. So having nothing to fear, I went to the meeting by myself, and then after a few simple questions, they suddenly issued a thinly veiled threat saying they were considering revoking my residency because of my alleged reporting on Palestine and Lebanon. So of course my answer was no comment. And as soon as I thought everything was over, I was ambushed by a group of plainclothes agents. They entered the room, flashing their badges in my face, and they said that they were the Austrian equivalent of MI5 or the FBI. They detained me, and then they served me with a warrant from the state prosecutor to search my home, search my studio, take all of my devices. Why? Because they think that I, a Christian Englishman, am a member of Hamas. Yes, you heard that correctly. They are accusing me of being a member of Hamas, of being part of the Izz al-Din Qassam brigades, of disseminating propaganda, encouraging terrorism, being affiliated with organized crime and a terrorist group. I mean, it's like reading something out of the Twilight Zone. So they seized my phone, and they drove me to my residence, ransacked the place. They even took devices which I repeatedly told them do not belong to me. Then they drove me to my studio and turned the place upside down. So I had to watch my devices being disassembled before my very eyes by a group of strangers. All these tools that I spent years building and investing in, the core of my journalistic profession. They took, in total, they took like 5-6 different laptops and computers, phones, USB sticks, hard drives, DVDs, you name it. And although the warrant was for electronic devices only, for some reason, they took photos of my residence, photos of the office, of the bathroom. They helped themselves to anything they saw: books, papers, documents, cupboards, closets. To tell you the truth, though, the agents treated me kindly and with respect. They didn't deny me any of my basic needs. Now, as you recall, I was unjustly arrested a few months ago in London. They jailed me for almost 24 hours under the Terrorism Act. Strangely enough, last week, the police in England again extended this investigation, and then suddenly this happens in Vienna. I don't think that is mere coincidence, okay? The first thing I asked the Austrian agents was, did my government put you up to this? And they replied, no, Britain doesn't talk to us. Well, forgive me, but I find that a bit hard to believe. I do think that this persecution, this raid, is related to the case in Britain. I think it's being coordinated with Britain. Now, my colleague Stefania Marizzi, who works on the Snowden papers with Glenn Greenwald, she reported last month in Il Fatto Quotidiano that the British police seized a graphene OS device from me and that it was very unlikely that they'd be able to crack it. So I suppose that's why Britain asked the Austrians to raid me, grab anything they could find, and go on this massive fishing expedition. You know, the warrant even mentions my arrest in London to try and bolster their case. The Austrian agents, they asked me for the passwords to my devices, and I said no, because as a journalist, I have an ethical, a professional obligation to protect my sources. None of them were compromised. During the raid, I spoke briefly with the techs who were extracting my devices, you know, from one node to another. And they told me that if they can't crack the devices, they send them outside sometimes to other countries, to other law enforcement agencies, and ask them for help. So that further indicated to me that this could very well be related to what's happening in the UK against me. Now, all these devices are work devices. They're my journalistic tools. I have been left with literally nothing. I mean, just to film this was a struggle. Okay, believe me. No phone, no computer, no SD cards, nothing. They cut me off from my work, from my contacts, from my family, from my friends. And the next day they dropped by and give me a list of all the things they seized. It was 19 pages long. You know, as a matter of fact, I've spent the last months writing a book on cybersecurity, as I'm unable to report and work normally under these circumstances. And they even confiscated my book. The book that I've been working on for 2 years now. You know, I just riffled through the manuscripts and the notes like it was nothing. So after watching all of my gear being dismantled, I was then ordered under this warrant to participate in an interrogation. So these agents, they took me down with them to the station, and I said 2 words, no comment. And that was it. Then they fingerprinted me, they palm printed me, they took mugshots and my DNA. And after 6-7 hours of this, I was finally allowed to leave. I categorically deny all of these accusations by the British and Austrian governments. I'm not a terrorist, I am a journalist, and they bloody well know it. Some of these Austrian accusations are very similar to the British ones, which again tells me that this is somehow coordinated. But it's actually a massive escalation. They are accusing me of being a member of a proscribed organization. I mean, this is insanity on another level. This is detached from reality. And they're trying to make a snowball out of nothing. So now, because of my reporting, I'm under investigation for quote-unquote terrorism in 2 countries. I could face up to 14 years in prison in the UK, plus another 2 to 5 years if I don't give them the passwords to my phones, and maybe another 10 years in prison in Austria, and my residency potentially being revoked. And why? For what? For journalism. Because of my reporting. I mean,
That's astonishing. That's astonishing. There's no other word for it. That's astonishing. And what sucks about this is it's so outrageous that they're going with this. It is so outrageous that he has to sit here and say, I am not Hamas. Think about that. Like, you are a British Christian who just so happens to have a conscience and have a conscience enough to point out, you guys are murdering people in a genocide. This is outrageous. Stop. And their response to this is, hey, we don't like the fact that you're pointing out that we're backing a genocide, whether it's Britain or the United States. And B, on top of that, because you are pointing it out, that we are now going to say that you are a member of Hamas. And forcing you as a journalist to have to come on air to say, I am not a member of Hamas. This is the wife beating thing, right? The wife beating thing. The issue of calling somebody a wife beater has less to do with whether or not they beat their wife. It has more to do with the fact that you want the person to say that they're not beating their wife. In this case, the man who's doing journalism gets called a member of Hamas, and on what is absurd allegations, using those absurd allegations with nothing to back it, short of his reporting, to then use that as a pretext to arrest, interrogate, and for that matter, destroy his capability of doing journalism. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. This is a weird norm that we're getting into. This is an odd space to be in, where journalism can be criminalized. That is what they're doing. And they're potentially putting 14 years on his head Now, keep in mind, in the United States, this notion of giving up your sources is something that you, as a journalist, don't do. They are trying to put 2 years over his head if he doesn't give up his sources, which is effectively what they're trying to get him to do by giving the passwords to his devices. Hey, we need more information on the people who you talk to. And in getting the information on the people who you talk to, hey, maybe a case comes up on them, right? I'm pointing out that they are calling him Hamas. And they're using, without anything to back it up, by the way, short of his reporting, and using that to criminalize. There is no free speech in the UK, but at the very least, to criminalize journalism. It doesn't fit their narrative, so they're criminalizing his journalism. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. This is not a good place to be. And when we're finding out that USA being stopped destroys or have undercut, quote unquote, independent journalists. And again, if they're getting money from USA, they're not independent, which is the reason why I'm using air quotes. They're being funded by the US State Department, meaning my tax dollars goes into propaganda all across the world to get them to push a certain narrative and a certain point of view. Those people would never be criminalized. Whether they're talking true or false, they would never be criminalized. Even when they get the story wrong, they would never be criminalized. Richard, oh, he's not afforded that luxury. Him reporting on what's happening in Gaza gets him put as Hamas. And the moment that they come up with this trumped up, nonsense, ridiculous, absurd charge, they now use it as a pretext to destroy his life and to potentially put him in a cage. Out fucking outrageous. Outrageous. I'm going to end this. I just wanted to make this clear. This is somewhat of a solidarity video. I'm just pointing out this is outrageous of what Europe has come to. How fickle, how weak, how insecure do you have to be to go after an independent content creator? I don't know what Richard numbers are, but whatever those numbers are, obviously they bumped up enough where the British government is concerned. The Austrian government is concerned. And this is not concern coming out of, oh my God, this guy's about to blow something up. There is no way they believe that he's Hamas. No way. I don't believe it for a moment that they believe that. They were looking for any reason, rationale, justification in order to make his life miserable. And this is what they've landed on to do so. It is nonsense. The idea that the man has to make a video saying, I am not Hamas, is outrageous. It's astonishing, to put it mildly. I am blown away by this. Blown away. I'm going to end it. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. Janice Anderson. They're labeling him that way to prosecute him for being informative. Yes, absolutely. And countering the narrative. He speaks the truth which undermines their BS. Yes, it's that. It's that. Let's be honest. It's that. There's no way that they believe that the guy who's on TV, who is on doing his social media, who's doing his journalism, is about to blow something up. I don't believe it for a moment. I don't believe it for a moment. I'll end it. Like, share, subscribe. My heart goes out to him. They're trying to make his life miserable. They're doing this on purpose. They know exactly what they're doing. Have a good one, all. I'll see you in a few.